Well, both sides wish to call the tune. Those that believe in God say, but I start from this premise. This is what I value. Those that don't wish to believe in God say, no. We want a situation where we can discuss this reasonably. And reasonably, the rules of being reasonable are that we don't assume anything we can't prove. And by proof we mean basically some sort of material evidence. In other words, they too call the foundation from which we're supposed to start, namely a procedural approach to finding out what we should believe. And the more liberal such view is, the more that approach says that we don't come down on any one definition of truth or reality, but preserve a permanent uncertainty of all things. The procedure continues, of course, to try and reach a harmony by reaching what the truth is, by reasoning in this particular way of logical discourse. But it's a logical discourse that excludes the opposition from the beginning, of course, in that it's assuming that the discourse itself be in terms of no God existing. An uncertainty about God, an uncertainty about God not existing and existing, of course. But the procedural approach requires that we remain uncertain from whichever side we come from. But that rules out, of course, those that come from the God-fearing side, God-loving side, I might say, not fearing. Don't get me wrong, I mean, it's just as unfair in a sense what the godly are arguing for, which is that you accept the conclusion and reason from it at the start. This is unacceptable to the liberal mind, just as the liberal mind, as defined above, is unacceptable to the godly. In a simple way, you can say the godly are narrow-minded and the liberal are broad-minded. Broad-mindedness to the godly is a sin. You're flirting with evil. You shouldn't touch it. Entertain it. Think along those lines. Be led astray. That's very dangerous. You don't do that sort of thing. You know your God and you stick to it. It's called faithfulness, trust, integrity. It's all part of the way such words are defined. It's not that the secular don't have trust and integrity. They trust in the uncertainty of all things. Perhaps much in the sense of more the material, that the unseen, especially as unseen in terms of what is loosely called supernatural, is not verifiable, so remains uncertain, can't be banked on. It certainly cannot take on trust that all Scripture is true, or that God said. Where's the proof? And the proof is needed because they start from a position of no God existing. From the godly point of view, it's a distinct possibility if you're presented with God said. Well, it could be, but we better check this. What's the criteria we use? They're both extremely rational. Their rationality starts from different beginnings. One is wedded to the end result from the beginning. They see God as all-powerful and will win. The other is wedded to procedure, because all ends are uncertain and will remain uncertain in this world as far as they know. And that colours, therefore, their way of rationalising from such a premise. It's not then that if we're more liberal we can reach a harmony, any more than if we're all godly we're going to reach a harmony. The opposition are not open to being more godly. It doesn't seem a feasibility, it's a non-starter, it's not their experience. Such is the usual level of debate. If you're reading a book by a chap called Stanley Fish, The Trouble with Principle, his concluding penultimate chapter and the last one, it's very clear on arguing in this way. But this does not actually exhaust possibilities. My own experience was I started secular. How did I make the transition? I was fascinated by the miraculous, not believing the existence of God, but the miraculous is fascinating. I mean, are there people with miraculous powers? Are there miracles, if you like? Perhaps they're in ancient Tibet, or are they in the Himalayas somewhere generally? Is the black magic of Northern Europe or the darkest Africa actually valid in the sense that they can achieve miraculously nasty things? Oh, is there anyone that can tell the future? Are there people that are clairvoyant? And so forth. And of course, if you've had some experience of that, you continue to be fascinated by it, but not wedded to the idea of God, not that sort of supernatural. No, you may treasure your independence of such thought, but still be fascinated in the supernatural. How did I come to be a person that chose to believe in God? Oh, something happened in my life that made me want to. Was it that I wasn't loved as a child? No, I was loved as a child. I valued love. Oh, yes. Valuing love just meant I was therefore going to be a humanist if I didn't know anything really much about God. You could say I knew about God in that I come from semi-sort of Christian type society, and Mum was also interested in other religions, but more from a point of view of the miraculous, not God. Been to church, Sunday school as a child, been there, done that, didn't do her any good. Mum was Catholic, her mum, but seemed very weak compared to a violent dad, and that wasn't much help. Not impressed. But of course I'm reading Autobiography of a Yogi at the age of something like 24. Yeah, 24. And I'm flirting with the ideas that he's got there. And he's not talking about God so much as miraculous gurus and the supernatural. But because he's trying to align his beliefs, Hindu, with Christian, he's drawing parallels between his religion and what he sees Christianity to be, which I might point out is quite radically different in some ways to what Christianity thinks Christianity should be. And that was interesting in itself. So I was thinking of his ideas. And of course he does believe in God, albeit Christian would say not a Christian God quite. But a Hindu would say, oh yes, a divine being, Krishna and so forth, which is confusingly near the sort of guru rather than God, which is not so dissimilar to the Christian view that Jesus is more of a guru than God, and then the purists say, no, he is God, and so on. But from this discourse, his autobiography, which is really more the experiences he had in meeting incredibly unusual people, gurus and saints and miracle workers and people that never eat and people that don't sleep and people that can perform miracles, and very special people, you would have thought. And we're talking about a person who, I don't know, about the age of 20-something goes to, 23 I suppose, goes to live in Los Angeles, and he's an Indian guru. He's a holy man, really. Not a priest of a temple, but a devotee of a guru. Ashram-type Hindu religion. So I'm reading a book that's fascinating enough without being too close to Christianity to throw it out. Not so far away from Christianity as to not be able to see what he's talking about. I was also in a very significant state of mind in that I felt I'd come to know, not just to be a humanist, but to know what love is, which was to truly want the best for someone, not ownership of them. And I'd given up someone I was in love with for that very reason. I mean, given they wanted someone else, you could say, well, you had a gun to your head anyway. I mean, you weren't going to get anywhere, Marshall. But I didn't see it like that. I was on cloud nine, writing poetry, reading this autobiography. In a completely different world, I wanted God to exist. I thought, that's very strange. How could I want God to exist? Do you see there's a third approach? Nothing to do with whether I'm a God believer from the beginning or whether I'm a secular person, and in a sense never the twain shall meet. They do meet. The Christian tells you immediately, oh no, they definitely get converted. Yes, we get converts. What they don't tell you is that, yes, they also go the other way. You've got an incredible wastage rate too. I mean, simplistically, the number that went forward in Billy Graham meetings were nothing like the number that remained in Christianity 20 years later. Perhaps 1 in 100. Not insignificant when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, but not what appears, and not to, in some sense, diminish the importance of the size of that religious sector, because there's a vast number that adhere to the faith who are born into it. They simply take it as God exists. Not necessarily quite the preacher's God, but, well, he's a good man. I'm sure he's got it right, although I can't quite follow everything he says, you know. It's that sort of approach. And after all, we're all sinners anyway. I mean, it's true, the membership of churches is declining in many sectors. Pentecostals aren't, they're growing like mad, especially, of course, in what used to be called the Third World and so on. But now places like Japan and China too. In fact, there's a very small part of the world that doesn't believe in the divine. They're not at all in agreement as to what the divine is, of course, and how to worship him, or not. But do you see, it's not a case of, oh no, I haven't said the crunch word, have I? Do you find that wanting to believe leads you to practice believing. If it does and you find it works, well, that's the end of the story. I don't care whether you proved it to me or not. I'm doing it because I find it beneficial. If I practice it or don't practice it very well and find it doesn't work, well, been there, done that. Do you see? So it's not that there is no transfer from one sector to the other. It's not necessarily for only one type of reason, namely rational argument, except that in a sense it's very rational. If I find that something works, and I was willing to give it a try because it might work from my perspective, and I find it does work, which is my case. I mean, it works in the sense that I'm a much happier person, far more able to take the knocks of life, and life's a joy. Not an endless heaven, of course. I still get the mix that others people get, but it doesn't affect me in anything like the same way because of my beliefs. And the more I experience believing, the more I believe. So that's a possibility too, you see. This doesn't mean to say that we can come to an agreement on specific issues where we're fundamentally different. Say, for instance, you don't believe like I used to not believe, and I do like I do now. We can't bridge this gap, perhaps, highly likely, on many issues, because we come from different foundations. Perhaps we can choose slightly different societies. For instance, if every person's allowed their own religion, in as far as it doesn't actually impose in the following ways, ... on each other, well, that's a step forward. If I can send my kids to a Christian school or a Hindu school or a Rudolf Steiner school, and you can send yours to equally any of those or a secular school just as easily, well, haven't we found a solution? Perhaps we can't do this with everything, but there's an example of where you can. And we allow churches and mosques and whatnot. I agree, if one of these religious groups is violent and so on, we can't tolerate that because it imposes on others. That's an obvious sort of imposition. Subtle impositions like, I have to put up with church bells and the mosques calling the faithful to prayer. Well, we could have an agreement, I suppose, that none of us do this. Or we could just put up with it. It's not the end of the world. I've got many friends who are Hindu and others that are Muslim and others that are Sikh, some that are Christadelphians, some that are Mormons, one or two that are Jehovah's Witness even. It's not that much of an imposition on me, especially for the peace of not having some religious wars. There are other wars going on, of course, which somehow the state seems to find itself in. It's not that we've solved everything. And perhaps the state has to be what it is to keep the state intact. That might require going to war, even though I might long to be a pacifist. Some countries can put up with quite a few of its population being pacifist, especially its priesthood. They're exempt from call-up. And perhaps others, if they're strongly not likely to be willing to kill the enemy, perhaps they can be used in other ways. We can put them in the Red Cross. They can help people. They're obviously good at helping people. So, the problem isn't quite as intractable as perhaps a good chap like Stanley Fish views it in his book here, of a few decades ago now. And I don't think the world's changed that much, nor will it change much in the future. But our arguments change. Yes. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.